has had patients who are complaining about voices in their heads. So he started checking into it. And Dr. John Hall is now convinced that there's much more going on. Up next, his work, A New Breed, Satellite Terrorism in America. That's next on Coast to Coast AM. Dr. John Hall, medical doctor in San Antonio, Texas, author of the book, A New Breed, Satellite Terrorism in America. He is an active member of the Mind Science Foundation, dedicated to the study of human consciousness. He sits on the medical committee of the human rights organization Freedom from Covert Harassment and Surveillance. He sits on the medical committee of the human rights organization Freedom from Covert Harassment and Surveillance. John, how are you?
I got it really good, George. Really honored to be on. I'm glad you're helping expose this problem.
Oh, it's scary. Got to ask you, how did this all start for you? I know you're a doctor, and I know some patients started coming to you. Was that what happened?
Partially, it's a personal story. I was in a relationship with a woman that began getting stalked. Started with stalking, and we had noticed people following her to and from my home, following me to and from her home. Then she began having conversations with people that weren't there, and being drugged with Rohypnol, a date rape drug, and raped by people that were breaking into her condominium. Started writing down the plate numbers of the stalkers, and they all traced back to a private investigative service owned by a former FBI guy, and some of his relatives, some of which were former members of the Department of Defense. So did a little checking into what was going on with her. She had been no evidence of mental illness in the past or anything like that. Started checking into what technologies could do this. I'd heard a little bit about satellite surveillance in the past, and luckily had some friends in the intelligence business, and spoke to a friend on the FBI and the CIA to verify some of the technology, and it seemed to be following her everywhere. And indeed, they said, yeah, we do have technology out on satellite that can use X-ray imaging to see you indoors, and there are directed energy weapons on it to attack you with, and as well as some audio harassment tools. And indeed, they said, yeah, we do have technology out on satellite that can use X-ray imaging to see you indoors, and there are directed energy weapons on it to attack you with, and as well as some audio harassment tools. So when this starts to happen to them, nobody listens.
Jeez, it's frightening.
I know most of the victims I've talked to, including several people here in San Antonio, that's been going on for over a decade, and that included not only directed energy attacks, but stalking, as well as hearing voices. The voices that these victims hear are usually very clear, very distinct, sometimes multiple people talking not only to them, but to each other, sometimes using their real names. Sometimes the victims know the names of the people that are doing the watching. It's obviously surveillance combined with attack.
Are they being attacked 24/7, John?
A lot of the people are being attacked 24/7. It seems like some of the goal of the attack is to keep people up 24 hours a day. Sleep deprivation, which is one of the other reasons that we're looking at this as possibly being some form of government experimentation.
It sounds like that they may be, picking people and then just testing.
It's really random. We've done, through Freedom from Covert Surveillance and Harassment, the human rights organization, we've done some pretty extensive surveys to try to get the demographics on the population that's being attacked. 70% are women. Most of those women are between 35 and 50, either divorced or single and living alone. So there seems to be a large sexual assault component to it.
They're trying to take advantage of them, or what with that?
It appears to be that a sexual assault component to it. There's often PIs involved, a large attorney group. It appears that this may be getting networked through large law firms or private investigative groups.
Interesting. Now, this is going on in a number of states?
From the surveys that we've taken and from the people that I've interviewed, it's going on in every state. Pretty much we found the four biggies are California, Texas, Florida, and New York City. It is a global problem.
What is the position of your colleagues in the medical community to this?
The position of I know the American Medical Association, most of the medical establishment is, right now there's not even an admission that directed energy weapons are in existence.
This is frightening. This is absolutely frightening. We're going to get into your thoughts on what people can do about this. Roger Tolsis, who was my guest, who was telling us about these beams into people, where some people actually think, John, that their neighbors are doing this to them.
That is the type of thing. It's what it's apparently geared to do. Now, I'm not saying neighbors aren't involved. A lot of times in situations, in our situation in San Antonio, there were some neighbors involved in the stalking aspect of it. Voices that sound like they're talking to you or about you, a lot of times they sound like they're on the other side of the wall or outside the window, so you do start to think it's your neighbors. And I think it's really geared for you to do something stupid to your neighbors to seal your fate as far as a psychiatric diagnosis.
That would drive me crazy. I mean, I know when one thinks, in our moment of solace, okay, we sit back. Whoever we are, we can hear that voice of us in our heads. George, let's do this today. Let's go here. Turn right. We hear a voice in our head whenever we think. If it's actually somebody beaming this into our brains, I mean, that's got to drive people insane.
And you're right. I mean, that's one of the things when we talk to some of these victims, self-realization of thought, the little voice you hear in your head. We read a book, you hear your own voice as you read the sentences. What happens is when those voices are put there in a similar tone, then that becomes a thought, and you will act on those thoughts, and that is a mechanism of control.
To do this, they also have to have some knowledge, I think, of the brain, of psychiatry, don't you think?
Yeah. If you look throughout most of the research on this type of technology and behavioral and mind control, starting with MKUltra, psychiatrists have been at the forefront of the problem. And there's plenty of literature out there. There's been information from the Freedom of Information Act on microwave hearing, where we now do have technology to put voices in the head, and the psychiatric community seems to be ignoring that. If you go to a psychiatrist and you're hearing something that they don't hear, then you almost get a turnkey diagnosis of delusional disorder. They do not bother looking at any of the resources that you might bring in to show them. And we're hoping to change that through some of our activism through the organization.
The role of psychology in all of this. So what are the colleagues saying about this?
Well, as I was saying, most physicians don't recognize this as a victimization. Psychiatrists especially, eventually if you start telling people you're hearing voices of people surveilling you and that you're being attacked with weapons that you can't see, you can surmise that the next step that they're going to have for you is in front of a psychiatrist. The psychiatric community doesn't even bother looking at any of the research that's been coming out in mind science especially. They basically give you a turnkey diagnosis of delusional disorder. The reason for delusional disorder is most of these victims that we're finding, people that are being exposed to this are in between 35 and older. Schizophrenia in males and females usually starts at a fairly early age, so that really puts them out of the age range of getting a schizophrenic diagnosis. However, delusional disorder usually starts in the 40s, and most of these victims are in their 40s or older, so they wind up getting a diagnosis of delusional disorder. By definition, that's believing that non-bizarre events are happening to you, usually without hallucinations and without memory loss by definition. Now, the weird thing is, if you look